The room was not a room at all. It was a hall wider than any human stadium, filled with light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The man stood at the center, alone, while hundreds of alien eyes stared down at him from high. Seats that curved around like the edge of a great circle. He could not tell if the walls were metal, glass, or something beyond human science. They shifted with colors like water, alive and moving. He felt small, a single human in a place made by beings who did not believe in limits. The aliens did not hide their laughter. They spoke in voices that cracked the air, harsh and sharp, yet he could strangely understand them. Some whispered to each other, others pointed long fingers toward him. One tall creature leaned forward, its mouth twisting in a mocking smile. "Human," it said, "play the Xenotone for us." The words fell heavy on him, though he did not know what a Xenotone was. Still, he felt the weight of their amusement, the way they mocked not just him, but all of humanity. Another alien shouted from the side, "They say humans love noise. Let us see if they can survive true sound." Their laughter rolled like thunder across the chamber. He felt anger rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew their eyes wanted to see him rake, to see him beg for mercy. A platform rose before him, smooth and glowing, carrying an object that looked beautiful and terrifying. It was the Xenotone. It was not like any instrument from Earth, not like a piano, a violin, or a drum. It looked alive, breathing, shifting, changing shape as though it had no fixed form. Strands of light ran across its surface, pulsing like veins. When it moved, it gave off a hum, deep and strange, almost as if the sound was inside his own chest. The aliens cheered, clapping their clawed hands, their voices echoing. They were certain he would fail, certain that a fragile human could not even hold the Xenotone. Their leader, a massive figure, with skin like dark stone and eyes glowing red, leaned forward. "Play," the leader commanded, the voice shaking the air. The man hesitated. He wanted to shout that he did not know how, that this was not fair, but he also knew they wanted his fear. They wanted his weakness. If he refused, they would laugh louder. If he failed, they would mock not just him, but all of Earth. And if he somehow surprised them, even for a moment, maybe it would matter. He stepped closer to the Xenotone. The air around it vibrated. His skin prickled with heat and cold at once. He reached out his hand, slowly, and as his fingers brushed the glowing surface, a spark of energy ran through him. It was not pain but power, like touching the raw heart of lightning. He gasped. Pulling his hand back, the aliens roared with laughter, pointing at him. "He cannot even touch it," one shouted. "He will fall before the first note," said another. The man clenched his fists. For a moment, doubt filled his mind. He was no musician, not a master of sound. He had only known the simple songs of Earth, the hum of radios, the strum of guitars, the beat of drums in the street. But then he remembered something. He remembered being a child, tapping rhythms on a school desk while others laughed. He remembered the way music had always carried emotion stronger than words. And he thought, maybe that was the key. Maybe the Xenotone was not about skill, but about heart. He placed both hands on it this time. The surface shifted, reshaping itself to fit his touch, glowing brighter as if recognizing him. A sound rose, low and deep, making the air shiver. The laughter of the aliens stopped for a second, then returned, louder, harsher. Look, it plays him instead of him playing it. They mocked, but he did not step back. He closed his eyes and listened, really listened. The sound was not just sound, it was emotion, waiting to be shaped, waiting to be guided. His chest tightened, his heart racing. For the first time since entering this hall, he felt something different. He felt the possibility of control. The Xenotone responded to his thoughts, to his feelings. It was like holding a storm and teaching it to dance. He opened his eyes, staring at the mocking crowd. He did not speak, but his silence spoke louder than their jeers. They wanted a show, and he would give them one. Not for them, not for their amusement, but for himself and for Earth. He pressed his hands deeper into the glowing surface. The hum grew stronger. The hall shook slightly, and the aliens, though still smiling, leaned forward without realizing it. Their laughter became quieter, their curiosity sharper. For the first time, they were not only mocking, they were watching, and he thought to himself, if this was to be his test, then he would not simply survive it. He would make them remember him. He would make them remember the sound of a human. The hall trembled with strange light as the man stood before the glowing Xenotone. For a moment there was silence, and in that silence the aliens grew restless. Then their laughter returned, louder and sharper than before, cutting into the air like blades. "Look at him," one alien hissed, its mouth stretching too wide, lined with rows of sharp teeth. "He holds it as if it is a toy. He does not know what power it carries." Another added with a cruel chuckle, "Humans are fragile. They think music is play. They do not know music is war." The words echoed, and every alien voice carried mockery. Their eyes glowed in strange colors, red, silver, violet, like fire trapped inside glass. They stared at him as though he was already defeated. But still, the man did not move away. The leader, the giant with stone-like skin, rose from his seat. When he spoke, the chamber shook. "Human," he growled, "you stand in the circle of sound. No one enters it without being judged." He raised a hand, and the walls themselves seemed to ripple. The hall became alive, vibrating with energy. This is no game. This is the Xenotone, forged in storms, fed by stars. It destroys the weak and crowns the worthy. The aliens shouted as one, a roar that shook his bones. "Play, play, play," they demanded, their voices merging into a storm. The man felt his throat dry. He wanted to shout back, to tell them that he was no warrior, no chosen one. But something inside held him still. He looked at the instrument. Again, the Xenotone pulsed like a heart, its light running through his fingers, as if trying to decide whether he belonged. Every beat of the light matched the beat of his chest. He realized the aliens had brought him here not to test him fairly, but to humiliate him. They believed humans were weak, good only for jokes and experiments. This was a show, a cruel theater, and the only way to survive was to turn their game against them. The crowd shouted insults. "He will break before the first note. His lungs will shatter. His blood will burn. He will crawl and beg for silence." Their voices rose like thunderclaps, crashing against his ears. But instead of fear, a strange calm entered him. The more they mocked, the more he felt something building inside a fire that refused to die. He closed his eyes. He remembered Earth, the streets filled with music, drums in the night, voices singing even when there was nothing to eat. He remembered laughter mixed with pain, how people still danced under broken lights. He remembered that music was never just sound. It was survival. It was the heartbeat of humanity. The aliens did not understand it. They had power. They had weapons, but they had never fought with song. That was the one thing humans could bring that no alien could steal. He opened his eyes and looked straight at the leader. "I will play," he said. His voice steady, though his heart pounded. The aliens laughed again, but the leader only leaned back, his glowing eyes narrowing with interest. "Then let the sound judge you," the leader whispered. The Xenotone shivered in his hands. It was alive. It wanted to be played, but it also resisted, pushing against him. As if testing his will, he pressed his hands harder, and a low hum filled the chamber. The aliens laughed at the first sound, sharp and cruel. "Pathetic," one shouted. "Even a child of the void could do better," sneered another. But the hum grew deeper, vibrating into the bones of the floor. It was rough, unshaped, but it was real. He did not know the rules of this alien music. but he knew the rules of heartbeats. He tapped the rhythm of his own pulse into the Xenotone. The instrument responded, glowing brighter, the sound sharper. The laughter of the aliens stuttered for just a moment, then returned louder, trying to cover their unease. The leader raised one hand and silenced them. "Let him play," he commanded. His voice like iron. The chamber fell quiet, except for the sound of the Xenotone. Every eye was on him, every cruel smile waiting for his failure. But he felt something. Strange now, the instrument no longer fought him. It listened. It bent to his emotions, his memories, his pain, his hope, and as he let his feelings flow, the sound changed. It was no longer just a hum. It became a voice that belonged to every human who had ever fought against the impossible. The aliens leaned forward, their eyes flickering, their smiles fading. Some whispered, uneasy, "This is not right. No human should command it. It bends to him." The man felt their fear like fuel. He pressed harder, shaping the sound, letting it grow louder, filling the hall with waves that shook the air. For the first time, the mockery stopped. The aliens were no longer laughing. They were listening, even if they did not want to. He was still only at the beginning, but already the Xenotone had chosen to obey him, and that alone was enough to turn mockery into silence. But silence was not victory. He knew they were waiting, testing, watching for his fall, and he knew the true challenge had not yet begun. This was only the opening note of something far greater, something that could either destroy him or change everything. The chamber was silent now, silent in a way. That was heavier than noise. Hundreds of alien eyes glowed in the shadows above, watching every move, waiting for his fall. The Xenotone pulsed under his hands like a living heart, warm and cold at once, its surface shifting as though made of liquid light. He could feel it fighting him, testing him, measuring him. He knew this was no ordinary instrument. It was alive, a creature made of sound, and it would either accept him or consume him. The first hum he had made still echoed faintly in the air, vibrating in the bones of the hall. The aliens had laughed at it, mocking the weak sound. But their laughter had not erased the fact that the Xenotone had answered him. That was the difference. It had responded, and he was not ready to give that away. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breath. He thought of Earth again, of how sound carried more than words. He remembered his grandmother singing to him at night, her voice shaky but filled with love. He remembered the rhythm of trains, the pounding of rain on broken roofs, the way street musicians played not for money, but for survival. He remembered that music was never just music. It was memory. It was power. When he pressed his fingers into the Xenotone again, it shifted, reshaping itself around him. Strings of light stretched beneath his hands, glowing brighter with every touch. The hum grew louder, deeper, reaching into the bones of the hall and pulling the air tight. It was not perfect. It was raw, uneven, but it was alive. The aliens leaned forward, their smiles fading, curiosity fighting with their desire to see him fail. "Impossible," one whispered, its silver eyes wide. "No human should control it," said another, its voice uneasy. But their leader, the one with stone-like skin, did not move. He sat still, watching with eyes that glowed like burning coals. Man pushed harder, letting his heartbeat guide his fingers. The Xenotone sang back, its sound rising into the hall like thunder breaking inside a storm. It was not just heard. It was felt, vibrating through every chest, crawling into every thought. The aliens flinched, some covering their ears with clawed hands, others gripping the edges of their seats. The sound was wild, uncontrolled, but it carried something no alien had ever known. It carried human struggle, human fire. The man did not know how he was doing it. He only knew that every time he poured his feelings into the Xenotone, it grew louder, stronger, more powerful. The instrument was no longer mocking him. It was following him, bending to his will, and yet there was danger too. Every note burned through his veins like fire. Every vibration felt like it could shatter his body from the inside. The Xenotone was not made for humans, and it demanded more than he thought he could give. The alien sensed it. See how it tears him apart? One hissed with a cruel smile. He cannot last, another sneered. But beneath their words was a shadow of doubt, for they saw what their leader saw this. Human was not breaking. He was surviving. The sound shifted again. It grew sharp, piercing, slicing the air like a blade, then dropped low and heavy like the fall of a mountain. The hall shook, dust falling from the high ceiling. The aliens looked around nervously, for even they had not felt the Xenotone roar like this. The leader raised a hand to silence the whispers. His glowing eyes locked on the human. He leaned forward, as though listening not to the sound, but to the soul within it. The man felt sweat running down his face, his hands trembling, but he did not stop. Every note cut deeper into him, but it also pushed deeper into them. He could see it on their faces, even through their strange forms, the flicker of emotions they had never wanted to show. One alien's eyes watered, though it did not know why. Another clenched its claws tight, as if the sound had reached inside and pulled something long buried. The human was not just playing music, he was forcing them to feel. The Xenotone began to glow brighter, its surface shifting faster, almost frantic. It was as if the instrument itself was excited. Awakening from a long sleep, the sound climbed higher, sharper, until it felt like the air would break apart, and then silence, not because he stopped, but because the Xenotone froze, holding the sound inside itself like a beast holding its breath. The chamber was breathless. The aliens stared, wide-eyed, waiting for the explosion. The collapse, the failure. The human stood still, hands pressed against the glowing surface. Feeling the storm inside it, he realized the Xenotone was waiting for his choice. He could let go and end it, or he could dive deeper into the storm, into the unknown. He looked up at the leader, and for the first time, he saw no mockery in those glowing eyes, only something colder interest, maybe respect, maybe fear. Human tightened his grip. He whispered to himself, "Not yet." And with all his strength, he pulled the sound free. The Xenotone screamed, a note so sharp it cut through the air like lightning. The walls shook, the floor trembled, the seats rattled. The aliens gasped, some stumbling back, their bodies shaking under the force of the sound. It was not music, it was power, raw and untamed, but carrying the echo of a human heartbeat. The aliens who once mocked him now looked in awe, fear twisting their faces. For the first time, the laughter was gone. The man stood shaking, breath ragged, body weak, but he did not release the Xenotone. He had crossed the first line, and the hall knew it. The aliens whispered among themselves, their voices uneasy. This is not possible. The Xenotone accepts him. The human cannot be allowed to continue, but it was too late. The storm had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The chamber shook as the last scream of the Xenotone faded into silence. Dust drifted from the high ceiling, settling over alien faces that no longer laughed. The man stood trembling, sweat dripping down his brow, his chest rising and falling as if he had just run through fire. Yet the Xenotone still pulsed in his hands, alive, hungry, demanding more. The aliens waited, their glowing eyes fixed on him, waiting to see if the human would collapse or rise. Again, he closed his eyes. The silence was heavier than the sound. It pressed down on him like a weight, but inside that silence he felt something stirring. It was not just the Xenotone, it was memory. It was the heartbeat of his people, and he realized what he must do. The aliens had mocked him. They had laughed. They had wanted a performance of weakness, but if he was to play, he would not play their way. He would not play for their amusement. He would play for Earth. For every song sung by people who refused to be broken, For every rhythm beaten on broken walls, every melody carried through pain, every voice that rose even when silence tried to bury it, he pressed his hands deeper into the Xenotone. The glow spread across his arms, wrapping him in living light. The sound began as a low hum, steady and deep, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. It grew stronger, each pulse echoing through the chamber. The aliens frowned, shifting uneasily in their seats. This was not the chaotic noise they expected. This was order, rhythm, life. The hum became a rhythm, simple at first, like footsteps in the dark. Then it grew, building into a pattern that carried strength. It was not alien. It was human, raw, and imperfect, but filled with spirit. The aliens leaned forward despite themselves, drawn to something they did not understand. One alien whispered, its voice trembling, "What is this sound?" Another replied, "It carries memory." But they had no word for what they felt, for in their world music was power, weapon, command. They had never known music as emotion. They had never felt the way sound could carry love, loss, and hope. All at once, the human's body shook with the effort, but his eyes burned with fire. He let the Xenotone pull his memories into sound. He remembered the laughter of children playing in broken streets. He remembered the cries of soldiers in battle, the tears of mothers waiting. He remembered songs sung by workers in factories, by sailors on dark seas, by people who had nothing but still gave everything in their voices. And the Xenotone sang it all, pouring humanity into the air. The aliens stiffened, their eyes widening. Some clutched their chests as if the sound had reached inside and touched something they had never known. One creature with silver scales began to shake, its eyes wet with tears it did not understand. Another pounded its fist against the seat, trying to resist the flood of emotions washing through it. They were warriors, rulers, conquerors, but they were not prepared for this. For the first time in their long lives, they were feeling, truly feeling. The leader narrowed his glowing eyes. But even he could not hide the way his jaw tightened. The sound carried into him too. He remembered battles, victories, empires, yet the human song cut deeper than all of it. It whispered of weakness, yes, but also of strength born from weakness. It carried a truth the leader had long denied, that sometimes the powerless hold more power than kings. The Xenotone glowed brighter, brighter than ever before. Its surface shifted, reshaping into new forms as if it too was learning from the human. The notes rose higher, sharper, like a cry to the heavens, and dropped low, heavy, like the weight of sorrow. It was not perfect. It was not clean, but it was alive. Every sound was alive. The aliens began to murmur, their voices filled with fear. This is not possible. The Xenotone was never meant for this. It should not respond to him. But still the sound poured out, unstoppable, the humans. Hands burned with energy. His veins glowed with light. Every note tore through him. But every note also gave him strength. He was not just playing anymore. He was becoming the Xenotone, and it was becoming him. Together, they were weaving a story and sound, a story of humanity. The chamber shook. The walls rippled like water. The air grew thick and heavy. Aliens who once mocked him now sat frozen, their laughter gone, replaced with awe and fear. Some trembled, some wept. Some clenched their claws against the flood of emotion. They had never been touched like this. They had never been forced to face the truth that a creature they saw as weak could reach into their very souls. The leader stood slowly, towering over them all, his glowing eyes fixed on the human. His voice rumbled low, barely above a whisper, but carrying through the chamber like thunder. "Enough," he said, but the Xenotone did not stop. It roared louder, feeding off the human's determination. Refusing to be silenced, the sound struck the leader himself, forcing his stone-like body to tremble. The man opened his eyes, meeting the leader's gaze. He saw no mockery there now, no smile, only a shadow of something far more dangerous, fear. For the leader understood what the others did not. This was not just music. This was defiance. This was power. And power in the hands of a human was something the aliens had never prepared for. The last note rose like fire, burning through the entire chamber, shaking the walls until cracks spread across their perfect surface. Then, with one final surge of light, it ended. Silence followed, but it was not the silence of mockery. It was the silence of revelation, of a truth too sharp to be denied. The human staggered, barely able to stand. But he held the Xenotone still. The aliens stared at him, their eyes wide, their pride shattered, and in that silence, one truth became clear. The sound of humanity had broken their mockery, and nothing in the galaxy would ever sound the same. Again, the silence after the last note was heavier than any sound. It pressed against every alien in the chamber, forcing them to feel the echo still vibrating in their bodies. The humans stood weak, swaying. But the Xenotone still pulsed in his hands like a living flame. His body was trembling, but his eyes were steady, locked on the crowd that once laughed. Now those same voices had been stolen, replaced with a silence that carried fear. The first whisper came from the high seats, sharp and broken. "This is not possible," one alien muttered, its skin flickering between colors, as if its body betrayed its unease. Another hissed back, "The Xenotone has never answered a human, never, not once." A third voice, harsh and bitter, growled, "This is trickery. He cannot do this without deception." But their words were not filled with confidence. They were filled with cracks, cracks of doubt, cracks of fear, cracks of something they had not felt for centuries. The sound had touched them. It had reached places they had sealed long ago. And now they could not pretend it had not happened. The leader rose slowly, his massive body casting a shadow over the chamber. The red glow in his eyes burned brighter. But even he could not erase the flicker of unease that passed across his face. "Silence," he commanded, his voice rolling like thunder through the hall. The whispers stopped instantly, but the fear did not. Every alien in the chamber could feel it pressing on their hearts. The leader pointed a clawed finger at the human. "He is nothing," the leader roared, "a fragile creature of dust, a mistake of nature. This sound means nothing." His words were strong, but his tone betrayed the struggle within. He was not just speaking to the others. He was speaking to himself, trying to control what he could not control. From the shadows, one alien with silver skin stood, its voice trembling. "No." It said, "It means something. I felt it. We all felt it." A chamber erupted, voices shouting, overlapping, lies. Cried one. "He bewitched us," screamed another. But more voices joined, confused, afraid, angry. "He made me remember," whispered a deep-voiced alien, clutching its chest. "I saw things I should not see." Another hissed, "I felt weakness." And it hurt. The leader slammed his fist against the arm of his throne. The sound cracking the air, the chamber fell silent again, though the fear lingered like smoke. "This human," the leader growled, "is no champion. He is no warrior. He is nothing but a shadow, and shadows do not rule the light." But even as he spoke, his eyes betrayed him, for the leader had felt it too. The song had reached him, had stirred something he had buried beneath stone and pride. The human swayed, his body weak, but his voice was steady. "You felt it," he said softly, though his words carried across the hall like fire. "You laughed at me, but you cannot laugh now, because you know the truth." The aliens hissed, some in anger, some in fear, some in denial. The leader snarled, but his silence was an answer of its own. One alien, smaller than the rest, leaned forward, its eyes glowing with something close to wonder. It was not noise, it whispered. It was life. Others shifted, uncomfortable, unable to deny what they too had felt. Some gritted their teeth, some looked away, some stared at the human with hatred. The chamber was no longer united in mockery. It was broken, divided, the human gripped. The Xenotone tighter, though his arms shook from exhaustion. He felt their fear, their doubt, and he knew he had pierced something far deeper than he had imagined. This was no longer just survival. It was war of spirit, and for the first time, the humans had struck back, not with weapons, but with sound. A voice rose from the crowd, louder than the others, filled with rage. "End him," it cried, "before he breaks us all." The chamber shook with sudden agreement from some, their fear twisting into fury. "Yes," others shouted. "Destroy him. Silence the human." The air grew thick with tension. Claws, scraping against stone, eyes burning with fire. But still, others remained silent, their faces pale, shaken. Unwilling to speak against the truth they had felt, the leader raised his hand again. Silencing them all, he stepped forward, his massive frame towering over the chamber, his shadow falling across the human. His voice was calm now, too calm. "You think your noise has meaning," he said, his eyes locked on the human. "You think your fragile kind can stand against us with this." He gestured at the Xenotone, his claws curling tight. "Play again," he whispered, his voice like steel scraping stone. "Prove it was not an accident. Prove it was not weakness disguised as strength." The aliens gasped, some in fear, some in anticipation. To demand another song was dangerous, reckless. The human's body was already breaking, yet the leader wanted to see more. He wanted to know if the first sound was a trick, or if the human truly held the impossible. The man's chest heaved, his vision blurred, but he did not lower the Xenotone. He looked up at the sea of alien faces, some filled with hatred, some filled with fear, some filled with doubt. He saw cracks in their pride, fractures in their arrogance, and he knew if he played again, if he survived, he could break them further. He could turn mockery into respect, fear into power, silence into change. He nodded slowly, his voice weak but steady. "I will play," he said. The chamber shook with shouts, some cheering, some raging, some pleading for it to stop. But none could leave, none could look away. Every alien heart was chained to what would come next. The leader leaned back into his throne, his burning eyes unblinking. "And let the Xenotone decide," he whispered. The hall fell silent again, heavier, sharper, filled with suspense. And the human raised his trembling hands once more, ready to pull from the instrument not just music, but the truth of humanity itself. The hall was frozen. Every alien eye glowed in the silence, fixed on the fragile human who stood shaking, his hands gripping the living instrument. The leader's words still hung in the air like a blade. "Play again," he had commanded, and there was no escape from it. The man's chest rose and fell, his body weak, his veins glowing faintly from the strain of the first performance. But he did not lower the Xenotone. He knew the truth. Their laughter was broken. Their unity cracked, and if he gave up now, it would all vanish. He would be nothing again. But if he played once more, if he survived, he could burn the memory of humanity into them forever. He closed his eyes and placed his hands on the shifting surface. The Xenotone hummed low, almost as if questioning his choice. It was alive, restless, impatient. He whispered to himself, barely moving his lips, "One more time." And then he pulled. The sound exploded. It was not a note. It was a wave, slamming into the chamber walls and making them ripple like liquid. The aliens gasped, their bodies recoiling as the sound poured into them. The glow from the instrument wrapped around the man's arms, crawling up to his shoulders, searing into his skin. He screamed, but he did not stop. The sound rose higher. It carried the weight of every sorrow he had ever known, every loss, every hunger, every tear shed by his people. The aliens clutched their ears, their bodies trembling as the Xenotone turned memory into storm. One creature fell from its seat, crawling across the floor as if trying to escape what it felt inside. Another struck its own chest, desperate to silence the ache that had awakened there. The leader narrowed his eyes, but even he could not stay unmoved. His stone-like face twitched. His burning eyes flickered, for deep within the sound, he felt something he had long buried, the memory of fear. And he hated it. The man pressed harder, his breath ragged, his veins glowing brighter as if liquid fire flowed through them. Every beat of his heart was echoed in the Xenotone, louder, stronger, until the hall itself seemed to pulse like a giant drum. The seats shook, cracks spread across the perfect walls, dust rained from the ceiling. The alien screamed, but none dared to rise. They were trapped, forced to listen, forced to feel. The sound shifted. It became faster, sharper, alive with energy that could not be contained. It was not only sorrow now, it was rage, defiance, fire. The human poured everything he was into the Xenotone. He played not as a musician, not as a performer, but as a voice for his kind. Every note cried out, "We are here. We will not be broken. We will not be forgotten." The instrument roared with him. Its glow filled the chamber like a second sun. Its light blinding, the sound became unbearable, too strong for alien minds that had never been forced to carry such weight. Some collapsed, their claws clutching at the floor, tears streaming down their faces. Others shook violently, trying to resist, but the Xenotone was merciless. It poured humanity into them, whether they wanted it or not. The man staggered, his body close to breaking, but he refused to stop. The Xenotone burned him, but he clung to it. This was no longer about survival. It was about victory. If he stopped, humanity would be a joke again. If he continued, humanity would never be forgotten. The sound rose again, piercing, sharp, a cry that seemed to tear through the very air. The aliens wailed, their voices no longer mocking but broken. Some shouted for the leader to stop it. Others begged for silence. But the leader did nothing. His burning eyes were locked on the human, his body shaking, though he tried to hide it. For deep inside he knew, if this human survived, the galaxy would change. The man's vision blurred, the chamber spun, his arms felt like fire. His heart pounded like a hammer breaking stone. But the Xenotone still demanded more, pulling from him every ounce of strength. It was no longer just an instrument. It was a storm, and he was caught in the center of it. He gasped, blood on his lips, but still he played. Every note screamed against death itself, and every alien heart felt it. The sound was no longer just heard. It was carved into them, burned into their souls. It was pain, it was hope, it was defiance, and it was stronger than any weapon they had ever known. The leader finally rose from his throne, his voice shaking the chamber. "Enough," he roared. But the Xenotone did not stop. It surged louder, brighter, defying even him. The leader stepped forward, his massive form trembling, but he could not silence it, for the sound was no longer in the instrument alone. It was in every wall, every stone, every heart in the hall. The man screamed as the Xenotone reached its peak. A blinding light burst across the chamber. The aliens fell to their knees, their bodies shaking, their voices broken. And for the first time in history, they bowed not out of choice, but out of force. Not to a conqueror, not to a ruler, but to the sound of a human. The last note stretched, long and sharp, filling the universe inside that hall. Then it broke, shattering into silence. The light faded, the Xenotone dimmed. The man fell to his knees, gasping, his body nearly broken, but his eyes lifted, and he saw them, the aliens who once mocked him, now bent low, silent, broken, trembling. The leader stood, his burning eyes no longer steady. For the first time, they flickered with doubt, and in that silence, one truth became clear. The mockery was gone, the pride was broken, and the galaxy had just heard the voice of humanity. The Silence in the chamber was unlike anything the aliens had ever known. The sound of the Xenotone was gone, but its echo still lived in every corner, every wall, every trembling body. The human knelt on the floor, his hands still gripping the dimmed instrument, his chest heaving, his vision blurred. He was barely alive, yet in that moment, he was greater than any of them. The once proud audience of conquerors now sat silent, broken, their laughter dead, their pride shattered. No one spoke. Even the smallest whisper felt dangerous, as if sound itself still belonged to him. The alien leader stood towering above them all, his stone-like body still, but his burning eyes flickered with doubt. He had demanded proof, and proof had been given. The human had played again, and the Xenotone had bowed to him, not once, but twice. One alien broke the silence, its voice shaking. He changed it, it said, its clawed hands clutching the edge of its seat. Another hissed, "The Xenotone has never sung like that, never." A third whispered what many feared. It chose him. Their voices rippled through the chamber, no longer mocking, but uncertain, fractured, afraid. The leader raised his hand, and the whispers died instantly. He stepped forward, each movement shaking the ground, his shadow swallowing the kneeling human. "You are a mistake," the leader sighed, his voice low but sharp. "You are weak, your body breaks, your blood burns. Yet you touched what none of us could command." He leaned closer, his eyes glowing brighter. "Tell me, human, was it luck, or was it something more?" Man lifted his head, his body trembling but his gaze unbroken. His voice was soft, ragged, but steady. "It was not luck," he whispered. "It was humanity." The word cut the air like a blade. The aliens shifted, some growling, some trembling, some lowering their eyes, for they knew what it meant, though they had never spoken it. They ruled with power, with strength, with fear. But the human had ruled them with something far more dangerous, with heart. The leader stood silent for a long moment, his claws curled, his jaw tightened, his burning eyes locked on the fragile figure before him. The chamber held its breath, waiting. Would he crush the human and erase what had happened, or would he admit the truth? At last, the leader turned to his people, his voice rumbling like thunder. "You have seen," he said. "You have heard. This creature, this human, has touched the Xenotone in a way none of us ever could." The hall shook with shouts, some in rage, some in fear, some in awe. "No," one alien cried. "This is wrong. Destroy him." "Yes," another snarled. "End him before he breaks us all." But others stayed silent, their faces pale, their eyes wet with tears they did not understand. The leader silenced them with a glare. "This is not weakness," he said, his voice cold. "This is power, and power cannot be denied." The words spread through the chamber like fire. Some aliens bowed their heads, others clenched their claws, but none could deny what they had felt. The sound of humanity had reached them, and it would never leave. The man tried to stand, his legs trembling, but he forced himself upright. He gripped the Xenotone, its glow faint, but still alive. He looked at them, the conquerors of stars, the rulers of empires, and he spoke with a voice that was barely more than a whisper. "You thought you could break me with this," he said. "But instead, I broke you." The words were simple, but they struck deeper than any blade. The aliens shifted, their pride bleeding away, their arrogance cut open. The leader's eyes burned, but even he could not hide the truth. The human had won, but victory carried danger. The man knew it. He felt it in the silence, in the way some aliens looked at him not with awe, but with hatred. He had shaken their pride, and pride that breaks does not die quietly. It sharpens, it hardens, it seeks revenge. The leader raised his clawed hand again, and the hall stilled. He looked down at the human, his voice low, deadly calm. "You have shown us something new," he said, "and for that you will never be forgotten." He paused, his burning eyes narrowing. But whether you live to see what comes next, that is another matter. The chamber shivered with suspense. The aliens leaned forward, waiting. Would he strike the human down, or would he spare him? The man stood trembling, but he did not lower his eyes. He had faced death already, and if it came again, he would not run. The leader's gaze flickered, a shadow crossing his stone-like face. Then, slowly, he turned away. "Take him back to his world," he commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Let them all know what he has done." The aliens gasped, their voices rising. "Release him." Some shouted in outrage. "Exile him," others cried. But the leader silenced them with a glare. "No," he said. "Let them carry this fear." The human staggered, his body nearly broken, but his heart burned with fire. He had come as a prisoner, mocked and humiliated. But now he would return as something else, a messenger, a symbol, a spark that could set his entire kind ablaze. As the guards led him away, the chamber remained heavy with silence. The aliens stared, some with hatred, some with awe, all with unease. For they knew the truth, even if they would never say it. The human had played the Xenotone, and what he played had left everyone changed. The leader sat back upon his throne, his burning eyes dim for the first time. He whispered to himself words no one else could hear. "Perhaps the age of humans has begun."